Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Way Forward Workshop Leader Lunch Break. We are thrilled to welcome two amazingly talented women, Sarah Lentz and Sondra Palivoda. Sarah should have a very unique interest in this data that she's going to be discussing as she boomeranged back to Cleveland to join Team NEO. With her experience at the University of Pennsylvania program on opinion research and election studies, she is perfectly positioned to conduct research to drive growth in Northeast Ohio. At the University of Pennsylvania, much of her work focused on compiling and analyzing demographic data for primary and general elections. We are thrilled that she has chosen to return to her native Cleveland and Cleveland Heights to lend her talents to the work of Team NEO. Sondra similarly boomeranged back to Cleveland in 2020 from Cincinnati, where she coordinated community engagement, events, and communications for the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation. As manager of research at Team NEO, Sondra analyzes and consults on data for internal and external partners of the organization. She has recently dedicated her energy to developing the talent documents for the work of aligning opportunities at Team NEO. And interesting fact, she also brings with her expertise working on small-scale farms in Ireland. That expertise may not be quite as valuable in her current quest to drive economic growth in an urban area, but important nonetheless. Ladies, thank you for the great work you are doing, and we look forward to hearing all about it.
Okay, thanks everybody. Hi, and good afternoon. Again, my name is Sondra Palivoda, Manager of Research here at Team NEO. I've been with the organization for the past 2.5 years. And our research group here at Team NEO, we're tasked with helping answer economic and workforce questions every day for our staff and partners, which is a huge part of that over the last 2 years especially, has been hyper-focused on talent availability and trying to articulate and understand the trends and forces that shape our competitiveness as a region economically. So this presentation comes on the heels of some discussions that we had earlier this year with partners over at the Fund for Our Economic Future and Destination Cleveland. They had been hearing kind of through the grapevine that specific professionals had been leaving the area. And this kind of started a curiosity to see if this was part of a larger trend or sort of a one-off that could be attributed to a lot of the pressures from COVID-19. But today we're going to walk you through the culmination of those meetings and the data available that kind of backs it up. We're going to give you some key context about our labor availability and trends in the region, specifically over a decade of data. And then we'll review some of the implications of this research, which regional leaders that we know are already talking about and making changes relevant to this issue, and how this all fits into our strategy here at Team NEO. So I mentioned some key labor context on the previous slide. Over the past 5 years, our research team has collected and analyzed job numbers and job demand rates through that series that Marianne mentioned, called Aligning Opportunities. At the center of that series is demand for jobs, and especially in 3 industries: manufacturing, healthcare, and IT, and some other side driver industries. But those 3 specifically, manufacturing, IT, and healthcare, we see through data drive both investment and new job growth within the region. This data has shown that year over year, these industries have very high demand for workers. But while we have many higher education partners who are working in each of these industries to educate or supply job-ready Northeast Ohio students, and especially now with new investments looking to Ohio and our region especially, the rate of students graduating just can't keep up with the rate of demand in either entry level or overall job postings. This imbalance between supply and demand of workers is cushioned between other talent issues. In general, population and workforce numbers have decreased over time for many areas, not just in Northeast Ohio. But specifically, the Cleveland MSA saw a 4% decrease in their working age population in the time period that we're looking at, which is 2010 to 2019. That working age population are people aged 16 to 64. Previous research showed that Northeast Ohio also keeps less than half of students post-graduation as they expand to other metro areas for work, additional study, family, adventure, you name it. Another important piece of context here about our driving industries, healthcare, manufacturing, and IT, is that these types of jobs take a long time to develop workers in specialized fields. So in healthcare, there's a huge need for licensed nurses. In manufacturing, it's computer numerically controlled or CNC operators. In IT, it's data analysts or a plethora of other jobs relevant to each of those. All of these take multiple years to complete training before those who are ready to enter into the workforce. And this last point here was especially the main catalyst for looking into this data. If we need educated professionals to advance our driving industries, our talent strategy needs to focus not only on attracting or developing new talent, but on keeping the educated workforce that's already here. Now, a little bit of the nitty-gritty behind what we're actually going to show you. So here at Team NEO, our research focuses on 18 counties within Northeast Ohio, not just our main cities. Why? Team NEO is a Jobs Ohio network partner, which means we work to advance our Northeast Ohio part of the state in coordination with 5 other teams that focus on the economic prosperity of their slice of Ohio. So our Northeast Ohio economy is tied not just to one city, but to the success of several within the region. Investment in Youngstown or Canton could positively impact Cleveland and so on. We also did not look at the intra-county migration, which would be people moving in or out from like Cuyahoga to Summit County, because this happens all the time every year. And so finding trends might be a little bit difficult in inter-county. What we're able to do, though, is look at data for individual counties through the United States Census tool called IPUMS. It's the Integrated Public Use Microdata Series, which is not an easy acronym to remember. But this is a collection of data that we can use to better understand trends in our counties. But unfortunately, there are still limitations because of privacy concerns. But we use this data set to look at the number of people who had moved in or out of the 18 county region from 2010 to 2019. And we chose this timeline because it would allow us to understand patterns over time instead of taking into account the migration that most metropolitan areas saw out of city centers or suburban or rural areas from 2020 and 21. So Sarah's going to link a very interesting Brookings report that dives into that a little bit for any of those who are interested for some reading later. Sarah will talk about this third point here, the confidence and margin of error, but those two combined with fact checking from other research from major institutions like Brookings Institute or the IRS helped us feel confident in the numbers that we're going to run by you in the following slides. So what did this data tell us? From 2010 to 2019, 341,000 people were estimated to have moved into Northeast Ohio, while 440,000 moved out, which comes to an estimated net loss of 100,000 residents. During our conversations about who leaves the region and who moves in, one type of resident came up multiple times, and I'm glad that Marianne had referenced it twice, boomerangs. So for anyone unfamiliar with the term, this is someone who leaves their state or region for another, but eventually moves back. Unfortunately, there's no boomerang option in the data, but fortunately, the data tells us what state that somebody was originally born in, what county they live in now, and which county they lived in the year prior. So you can imagine why there are some privacy concerns around this type of data. With this information, we looked at people who were originally born in Ohio, who currently live in Northeast Ohio, county, one of the 18, but lived somewhere else in the previous year. So with all this, the data showed that 1 in 3 people who moved into our region up here from out of state were originally born in Ohio. What does that look like broken out? 138,000 people who were originally born in the state moved into our region, while 234,000 moved out of the state. Of that 234,000 figure, 40% moved somewhere else in Ohio, while 60% moved out of the state. I know it's a lot of numbers to throw at you, but that's why we'll be sending the slides afterwards. But which regions did these Ohio-born residents move to or from? Those who moved out of the region went primarily to Phoenix, Pittsburgh, Fort Myers, Chicago, Los Angeles. And similarly, Ohioans came from many on the same list, with Philadelphia replacing Fort Myers for the top 5 origins of where people had moved elsewhere into our region. While this doesn't wholly capture the boomerang metric, it does tell us that there is a case for talent retention in our region to take the front seat at the strategic table. So if we are really good at bringing people back, attracting people back into our region, how can we better keep them here over time? But now I do want us to pass it over to Sarah to dive into some of our other findings.
Yeah, so one thing that we looked at when we were diving into the data, we're looking at, so we understand around 100,000 people lost, and this is a good question, Brian, that was net 100,000 migration for the 18 county region. So we wanted to get an idea of what that actually meant kind of in a larger context and how that related to some of our peer cities to understand if maybe this isn't as bad as it looks, maybe this is just what a lot of MSAs around the country are experiencing. So we compared Northeast Ohio to Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, and Columbus due to their proximity to Northeast Ohio, their size, and some just similar historical context being in the Midwest. We're not comparing to a New York City or a San Francisco where they have a lot of other different factors that could affect this migration research. And so we compared Northeast Ohio's population loss to their total population over that 10-year period. And so to Brian's question, Northeast Ohio's population around that period is around 4 million. And then that 100,000 is around about 10%. Oh, no, sorry, those are incorrect. Sorry, our conference room phone call is calling. Sorry, not the net 100,000, but the 400,000 number that we estimated that people had left the region, that's about 10% of the 4 million people in the Northeast Ohio region overall. And so when you're comparing it to our peer cities, we actually are losing a smaller proportion of our total population over that 10-year period compared to an Indianapolis, a Pittsburgh, or a Columbus. And so, in some sense that could look good. We're not losing as many people relative to the size of our 18 county region. However, going to the next slide. However, looking at the proportion of people coming and going, Northeast Ohio isn't doing as well compared to its peer cities. So the dark blue bars represent the percentage of people who are leaving the region versus the light blue bars that show the influx people coming in. So as you can see, that red line is kind of a 50% in even outflow and inflow, so an even replacement of people leaving the region. Northeast Ohio's dark blue line edges to the right of that red line, meaning that we're losing more people than we're bringing in. So there is that showing that net loss. And if you compare that to other peer cities, Columbus is actually doing better. They're bringing in more people. They are growing. Pittsburgh and Indianapolis also see a little bit of a net loss, but at a smaller degree than Northeast Ohio. So it's a little bit of a complex picture when we're comparing to our peer cities. In some ways, we're maybe not doing as poorly looking at how we're losing relative to our size, but we're also not doing as good of a job bringing people in to replace the people that inevitably will leave. There is always going to be outflow and inflow into a region. Next slide. And so then to dig even deeper into the data, we wanted to look at who these people actually were. And that was a perk of looking at the IPMS data that Sondra mentioned earlier. They also take demographic data. And so one source of data that you can find similar information about migration is the IRS, but they don't have that demographic data. They just show where people move. So that was a perk of this IPMS data that we could really dig a little bit deeper into who these people were so we could try and identify some trends. So we look across age, education, industry, and then race. And I'll go over those in the next few slides, but that was those were our 4 main demographic points. So looking at age, for every 2 young adults, so 18 to 24 that moved into Northeast Ohio, 3 left. And that's an important age group for education and workforce. Those are entry-level jobs, very important, a very important age demographic, but it's also important to understand that Northeast Ohio was losing almost all age groups except children, so below 18. And it is important to know that for a vibrant economy, for a vibrant community, we need all age groups to be healthy and thriving in this region. And so while we highlight 18 to 24, since it is usually a high interest age group, again, they do have important factors for education and workforce, it is important not to ignore those other age groups. And we don't have a slide for it, but we were losing all of those age groups except below 18. And if you look across peer cities, Northeast Ohio is doing worse at retaining all age groups compared to Indianapolis, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. So then to the next slide, here we look at education. And so kind of a similar story and a similar graph. The dark blue is leaving, the light blue is coming. In almost every education category except master's degree or higher, we are losing more people than that we're bringing in. And in some ways, it's a good thing that we're bringing in more people with a master's degree, again, for what they're able to bring to the workforce and the education sectors here. But if you look at the job postings and what the actual demand is in the region, only 4% of jobs in the past year, I forget the timeline for that, I can check that, but 4% of job postings recently in Northeast Ohio required a master's degree. And so when we're thinking of our workforce and the talent that we need to fill the jobs, master's degree, that's a very small sector. And so similar to age, where we need all age categories to have a vibrant economy and vibrant community, we need all education levels. So we can't just focus just on master's or just on bachelor's. To have a healthy ecosystem, you need all levels of education. So it's important to focus on all levels when we're talking about talent retention. Then we looked at industry, and we specifically looked at 5 industries within the region, just to narrow the focus a little bit. And we chose these based on some of Team NEO's own strategic work and the industries that we focus on, but also looking at size of workforce, so that they're a big chunk of our workforce in Northeast Ohio, and then also GRP, and so what they're bringing economically to the region. So you can see management of companies and enterprises, very small chunk of the workforce, not too many employees in that, but they do bring a large GRP to the region. These are, CEOs, leaders of companies, so it's important to look at that as well. And so we can see that all of these top 5 industries are losing more people than they're gaining. So again, what that means for the workforce in terms of filling jobs and being able to have a functioning economy is really important. And then the next slide is kind of a zoom in specifically on IT. The way the government kind of classifies industries, IT as of now is not a specific industry. So that's why it wasn't included in the last slide, just because IT factors into many different industries. So we had to look instead actually at occupation groups. So this is kind of we're pretending it's an industry, but it's really a group of occupations that we're looking at. And we've looked at IT because it's kind of the hot industry right now. It's very interesting. It's growing. Also, with the shift towards remote work during COVID, it's a very important industry in that because of its ability to be remote. So this was something specifically that the fund and Destination Cleveland were interested in looking at. So that's also another reason why we specifically look at it. And I'll send a link kind of after I get through this portion, looking at another Brookings report that looks at the decentralization of IT. And so this is in a post-COVID world, and so not at how our analysis is looking from 2010 to 2019, but how due to the shift in remote work, they saw some movement from high IT centers like a New York or a San Francisco or an Austin, things like that, to Midwest cities, smaller areas that for a plethora of reasons, people might move back. And so that was one thing we wanted to look at. Although this analysis is pre-COVID, it's a baseline so that ideally we hope to kind of continue this research once the data come out for post-COVID, and we can see how that compares and see if Cleveland saw some of those benefits from the decentralization of the IT industry. So I'll be sure to link that.
And unfortunately, this type of data lags behind years. So it is good for that long-term back analysis, but understanding immediate trends, we have anecdotes,
Yeah, I think the 2020 IPMs just came out in the last few months, and even that's kind of half COVID, half not. So it'll be a little bit until we can do a full look, kind of post-COVID, quote unquote, whatever that means. But it's something we're excited to do. So the last slide. And then the last look we looked at was at racial groups and how they either leave or come into the region. And so Black, Asian, and Hispanic residents disproportionately left Northeast Ohio, regardless of education. This wasn't too surprising to us. What we found, there's been lots of reports, both quantitative and qualitative, showing this kind of movement out of the region with groups of color. And I think it's important to note that this research, doesn't prove anything about their disparate or unequal treatment. That is known by groups of color and doesn't need to be proven with some research that we did, but it does show a really important effect of that unequal treatment or discriminatory treatment they may face in the region. And that if Cleveland and Northeast Ohio does want to prioritize diversity, equity, inclusion in the region, they need to know that this is happening and this is an effect that is being shown. and therefore needs to take some action to combat it. And I would recommend, I will also link to this, the Project Noir study that happened, I believe last year in response to Bloomberg naming Northeast Ohio or Cleveland as the worst city for Black women to live in. And Project Noir followed up and did very good qualitative surveys with Black women in Cleveland, looking at disparate treatment in workforce, education, and healthcare, and how it's very rampant. And so, again, we see that connection here being saying that we all know that is happening, that is fact, and this is just an effect of that. And so we need to realize that and take actions to combat it. And so we'll transition a little bit into the recommendations and looking ahead, but knowing that, Project Noir, and they specifically focus on Black women, but all groups of color, these are, structural problems that they're facing. And so any actions or solutions we try to think through, they're going to have to be structural and big picture. These won't be small on the margins. These are really fundamental problems. So things to keep in mind, as you're digesting this work, this research, as you kind of hopefully take it into all of your great jobs as leaders of Cleveland, important things to keep in mind. So some of our recommendations that we developed with the fund and Destination Cleveland to focus retention and attraction program around BIPOC talent. For industry, consider tailoring retention strategies in key sectors. So again, kind of that healthcare, manufacturing, perhaps IT. In terms of workforce, those are really in high demand. And then actively connect and align with talent development, workplace, and policy change efforts. I think it's really important to tap into what's already going on in the region, not reinvent the wheel, work together. We've presented this to other groups and they've talked about how siloed some efforts are, and then everyone's just replicating the same thing. There's not communication between groups and organizations, and that really stalls any progress we can make. So I'm happy to see forums like this where, many people from all different organizations can understand this and hopefully connect to make some real progress. And then finally, just to deepen the research, like I said, hopefully we'll recreate this kind of when we have a little bit more post-COVID data and see if any of these trends continue, if there was any change with COVID, that really kind of structurally reshaping society and the economy and with the shift towards remote. So we're really excited for something fun.
And just to touch on that second to last point there, the actively connect, align with talent development. Team NEO, specifically with our partnerships with higher education institutes, workforce development partners, other economic developers, we are all convening and discussing these types of issues because it is our main priority to help the contribute to the economic well-being of the 18-county region. And while we have so many different communities within the region, we do need to understand where we need better support. So Team NEO has a couple initiatives, one being the Talent Attraction Alliance and the Talent Development Council are two different forums with both public and private entities trying to convene around these topics and these issues and find solutions, whether that is through the Greater Cleveland Partnership, who actively are looking into research like this, changing their policies, helping small businesses and larger businesses in the Greater Cleveland area. But we also need alignment across 18 counties, which is a real feat. So again, the deepening the research is for our Team NEO benefit and for our partners, so that we can understand where do we see change over time, where are we not seeing change, and who can contribute to what solution. So thank you all very much. We'd welcome any questions, comments, anything from the group now. Thank you.
Great, thank you both so much. So we do have a few questions that have come in. And you just mentioned kind of higher education. So how can we really capitalize in our region on all of the colleges and universities that are here to keep the college students after they graduate?
That's a huge question for people in higher education right now. One thing that we're able to influence is data around kind of the future of work and what certifications and skills are most in demand. there's so much data out there that getting the right skills and credential information into higher education hands is a big step, because ultimately they're in charge of crafting their curriculum that shapes the students' careers. Another big thing that we have been talking about and researching here are women and minority students, encouraging them into STEM and really broadening their view of what careers they should pursue. So how does higher educators encourage their young students or their returning students, transitioning students, career counselors? Where do they point students to as possibilities? And we know that in Northeast Ohio, these 3 industries have a ton of possibilities. They more often than not pay a family sustaining wage, which right now for a single parent of 2 kids is like upwards of $30 in Cuyahoga County, and that changes by county, but really giving people that information we think is critical.
I'll also just add to that some work that just Team Neo is doing and some other people on our research team are leading that I think is really interesting. Is I might mess up the title, so Sondra, correct me, but Careers by Design. Our research team is taking some of the insights we have on talent and, like Sondra said, these in-demand careers and certificates and trainings people need, and they're actually going to counselors at colleges, because these are the people that really are having FaceTime with students. It might not be the professors, it might not be the president of the college, it's these career counselors that are every day interacting with students so that they have a better idea of what is in demand in the region right now and how can students actually get those positions. So really just, I think, seeing some buy-in by the universities, and they really want to do this and they want to keep these students, and just getting practical connections. Because I think all people can say they want to stay here, they want to find a job, but when they go on LinkedIn and search jobs in Cleveland, it might not be as easy to actually make those connections. So that's just one example of some efforts that people are doing, but I do think it's just good buy-in by the universities and actually making those connections.
So on the flip side, in terms of, we're talking about training the talent for the jobs that are available, are there efforts around also trying to attract a diversity of jobs and opportunities to match the talent that is here?
I think that's a hard one because of how many cities are dealing with talent availability problems. I think that the issue right now is that mismatch between where people are already educated and getting them into jobs that require substantial education or a substantial pivot into 3 industries. I mean, healthcare, manufacturing, IT are very special industries with where you need a specific type of mentality to either care for people, analyze big data, big numbers, or be on your feet and maybe working in a manufacturing plant for a long time. So it's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I'll add to that just some few examples. That obviously there's a lot within that, but I do think the kind of new investment in the country, but specifically in Northeast Ohio around electric vehicles, I think is something that could be really exciting in the region due to our manufacturing past. We have good manufacturing infrastructure, skills, just the blue collar Rust Belt ideal here kind of. So I think trying to capitalize on that and modernize it a little bit, because I do think there's a kind of stigma against manufacturing jobs in a way that, you're just in a factory all day. They're not exciting. They're not new. They're not growing. And I think the kind of the electric vehicle, green energy push could be something that is really exciting for this region. And I know, Team Neo will work to attract those, but that's something kind of the flip side of what talent is already here and what infrastructure is already here, and then bringing some new businesses and industry in.
And actually, you referenced something that jogged my memory a bit. Some community colleges in the region and technical institutes are making their certifications more accessible on a shorter timeline. So that at least allows people who are looking for a career change to be able to do so in a shorter timeline. Yeah, that's definitely good.
So for those who are leaving Northeast Ohio for elsewhere in Ohio, are they primarily moving to Columbus? Are there other parts of the state that are drawing them in?
We didn't look specifically at that. Sondra presented some of the top 5 locations. And I think just how the data worked and what we were able to get, we actually only could look at people who were born in Ohio, moved somewhere else outside of Ohio and came back, just the way that the variables that we had available. So we actually weren't able to look in this view or this analysis at specifically within Ohio, kind of intra-Ohio movement. But it's something that I think would be really interesting, and perhaps we could get at using other sources that are a little bit more flexible with that.
And on the flip side, because we are a Jobs Ohio network partner, kind of any resident in Ohio does contribute to the overall success of the state. But of course, we are geared more towards the Northeast Ohio.
And as you looked at the movement of BIPOC individuals out of our area, where might they be moving and what might have drawn them to those areas?
That was another thing we didn't quite look at specifically by kind of racial or age or different groups looking where they're going. Part of that is, a boring technical answer. Once you get too small of a subsample, there's not great data, and then you're kind of extrapolating too much. So part of that was just logistically what we could do. I do think, depending on how we break it out, like at least specifically Black residents, like groups that are a little bit larger, I think we could do that analysis. I think if you try and break it up too much, where you're looking at, it's a certain racial group with an education, that then gets too small. But I think that is something we could look at going forward, at least the bigger groups where they're going.
Anecdotally, the conversations that we had with the fund and Destination Cleveland were really great, because it also opened our eyes to reminding, people will leave a city or a region if there's another with more with culture similar to theirs. So if they're just anecdotally, it was leaving for other cities that already had an established Black, Asian, or Hispanic community, a large one, right? Because in Northeast Ohio, at least from the recent estimates, it can be anywhere from 4 to 13% of our region that is of color. So we have had a lot of we had a lot of those anecdotal conversations where it mostly centered around what are the other cultural hubs for these communities. I did see a question about how do Northeast Ohio wages in the sectors in which we are losing workers compare with other areas. I just wanted to address that really quickly, because the data set that we have here doesn't show that, or doesn't dive into that level of depth. But more often than not, we have seen in Northeast Ohio an advantage with wages from the business side. So from the business side, we do have a lower cost of living here, but that also means that we have lower wages on average, which is good for businesses looking to start new jobs, but not necessarily good for workers looking to increase their wealth, which is where the different types of jobs that have family sustaining wages is why we point individuals to those careers.
So how can we maximize the boomerang effect and draw more of those born in Northeast Ohio back to the area?
Question of the age. I think Destination Cleveland is a big player in the region in terms of trying to understand and answer that question, and also to create campaigns that really target other Ohioans. I'm not sure if it was this past year or a couple of years back, but there was some ad campaigns around like Ohio being a great place for business, a great place for people, a great place for workers. So there's been different types of pilot programs to try and advertise the region a little bit more. But I think there's also a big word of mouth issue where Cleveland has had historically bad rap, or maybe Northeast Ohio in general gets a bad rap for whatever reason. And I think that the ad campaigns and especially marketing is in response to that.
And I'll add from just some conversations with Destination Cleveland that we had earlier, specifically with boomerangs, so not just attracting anyone, but specifically boomerangs. There is a little bit of a lighter load. You don't have to sell Cleveland as much, or Northeast Ohio. They have lived here, hopefully had a somewhat positive experience. And so I think you just don't have to sell it as much, and then you're kind of emphasizing slightly different things. But I mean, I will say as a boomerang, definitely family, which can be a hit or miss selling point, because I also know people who will never move back to Cleveland because of their family. But cost of living is a huge thing. I came from Philadelphia, way more expensive city. So there's some things that kind of cut across anyone coming to Cleveland. But I do think kind of specifically targeting a boomerang sense of already having some roots or already knowing this place a little bit can make it a little bit of an easier lift.
I'm not sure if I can't quite remember if I saw somebody on here from the RTA. I think I see Tariq from the RTA. I mean, I know that the RTA has been very much into investing more routes or more just general investment into the RTA system. Personally, my view is that a great public transportation system is a must. And I think the RTA has done a great job in the types of investment that they are looking to do. So that's, I mean, it's infrastructure also.
So many metropolitan areas, Buffalo, for example, have campaigns that offer funding to companies to move to the region. Are there incentives, campaigns like this happening in Northeast Ohio?
That's actually the nicest part about, or the nicest question for the job to address Jobs Ohio. Jobs Ohio has so many incentives for mostly medium-sized to larger businesses, but also small business programs throughout the state. So we're on the research team to help support a lot of our staff and partners, and a big chunk of our staff are working to talk with companies to see how they might be able to match them with incentives for the state, whether or not it's to retain them. So to address that comment, we can't let them leave in the first place. That's one thing that Jobs Ohio does towards that. They also provide incentives on like new research and development machinery or types of hardware that companies might need. There are incentives for that. You probably all heard about the Intel announcement. Jobs Ohio was a big part of offering incentives for that. So that's Jobs Ohio.
So what happens if we can't reverse this trend? Now, what kind of impact does that have on the Northeast Ohio region?
So I think we can all agree that the talent availability thing is the biggest issue, right? We have implications for how many or how much investment can be in a place based off of the number of people who are there, which is why having a metropolitan designation is such a big thing. Population loss is hugely important. Mostly from our perspective, we get requests for information, requests for proposals from companies who are looking to locate into Cleveland or into Akron, Youngstown, like Rittman in Wayne County, anywhere within the 18 counties. They ask, what is the population size within a 30 or a 45-minute drive time? Normally that puts together a couple counties, maybe 3 counties if you're lucky, if you have really good highway access. But that number could be the deciding factor between someone locating in Buffalo, for example, or in Canton. So lots of investment implications, lots of long-term funding implications for us. It has a big impact on our school districts, whether or not we have quality teachers who are able to teach those young students and encourage them to look in these types of careers. Anything to add, Sarah?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's a big question. Obviously, there's a lot of impacts and it can be a little bit of a snowball. You start losing people, you can't get more people, and then it snowballs out. So I don't want to be too doom and gloom, but I do think to kind of bring this back to talent retention and the focus that we did, I do think it really emphasizes the need to retain people. And like I said earlier, if people are already here, and to Nicole's point, can't let them leave in the first place. If people are already here, or perhaps boomerangs that have been here, they might have some draw here and they know some of the perks. And so trying to play on that and knowing that maybe attracting is going to be the harder, the uphill battle, and that might be harder to do. But knowing that we do have great people here, we have incredible, talent and a lot of vibrant communities in this area. And so if we can really find ways to just cut that bleeding a little bit, can really make a big change. And our boss's favorite line is that just connecting talent, we really do have talent here, and going back to that connection and making sure getting them into jobs that might make them more likely to stay. Hopefully they're paying us family sustaining wage. And back to kind of the diversity aspect and connecting communities of color. If we were to close the disparity between the representation of people of color in certain high demand occupations and to match their just baseline proportionality of them in the region, we would close our talent gap by over a third, just like that, if we could snap our fingers. So that obviously we can't do that as easily as snapping our fingers, but I think it just highlights the importance of, we do have great people here, we do have talent, we might be losing a little bit more than we're bringing in, which is a problem, but really working to retain what we have here and make those connections between people who might be looking for jobs and the jobs that we have.
And one other important piece of context that we included with the link is the population loss is everywhere. I mean, our population is not our birth rate is much lower than our death rate, or at least it's historically falling. So it's a good piece for everyone to know. Everyone is dealing with talent availability issues, especially in the wake of COVID, but you still have to make the best case for your area that you can.
So as you look to what's next, what additional research are you looking to implement? And really, what are some of those next issues you are looking to explore?
Definitely to start us off, the biggest question for us was, is Northeast Ohio better than other metro areas at bringing people back? We don't necessarily want to only compare ourselves to other other Ohio regions, but at least with the peers that we have been measuring ourselves against. And Sarah mentioned vibrant economy before. Our vibrant economy index is a bunch of data points on our region compared to 12 other markets like Pittsburgh, like Austin, like San Francisco, or other major markets. So we really want to dive into how we look compared to those peers. On the other hand, it's also the more data available, the better our findings are. So that also comes with time and being able to get access to that data.
Well, Sarah and Sondra, we thank you so much for the work that you all have been doing. And this is obviously such an important topic for our community. And we look forward to what's to come. And for those online today, I will be sharing these slides in the follow-up along with the links that have been in the chat. So look to your email for that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ann.
Thanks so much, Rachel, Sarah, and Sondra. This was just such a deep dive into the work that you've been doing, and we really appreciate all of your efforts and look forward to hearing more, particularly as you begin to explore all that data related to the pandemic. Appreciating it's a long line, but looking forward to see what's at the end of that. So thank you. Thank you for coming back to Cleveland. We're happy to have you here. Bring more folks with you.